So to me, that seems to be an government to take. Secondly, I took heart, Minister, in your explaining that you didn't rule over the Police Integrity Commission. That was a relief to me. However, I just want to have clarification. I guess the purse string is still yours. The budget matters for the Commission. Is that within your purview, or would that rest directly with Parliament? Because that is obviously an important aspect. He who controls the purse controls the subject matter, as we all know from various walks of life. So I just want to have that clarified. I take it obviously that there is a time lag here. Of the Commission, 2008. But although I still have to say that it seems that the output from the Commission's work is not satisfactory. I mean, given the 4 years that you have been working, the Commission has been working, I think the ratio of complaints coming in and what is being forwarded to the Prosecutor General should be a different one. So I would only here encourage you to make sure that that Commission has fully understood its mandate. On this as well, I don't think I got an answer to my issues. What happened when you had combined defense force and police force actions? Is it all falling within the police mandate, or would the matter be somehow channeled through the military apparatus? And the same goes for maltreatment in detention facilities, other than those under police supervision. Again, the need, why we come back to the need for an independent and self-sufficient review mechanism here is obviously that since we're dealing with complaints against those who are perpetrators, the core spirit, for nothing else, could be a block to a full and in-depth investigation. That's why a standalone body is the best model here. And I suggest that if you don't have a standalone, which is enough in your Human Rights Commission, you should seriously consider also to establish. When it comes then to the matter of corporal punishment in the school system, I now heard you refer to, I don't think that was before, to the Children's Right Act. And I would just be grateful for having the provision of that act where provision is. Regarding the Educational Act, I reread the Human Rights. I would like to refer you to page 20. The Human Rights Commissioner seems to be in the belief that the Education Act does not prohibit corporal punishment in the school system. So we seem to have a discrepancy between yourself, and I obviously rather would like to believe you. And that means that I would like to have also, if possible, the date of the adoption of the Educational Act and the provision in it which deals with the prohibition of corporal punishment against children. Finally, the question of flogging has been raised, and in your answer to, I believe it was issue 11, and there was a follow-up from as well on this one. You recognize, and this is paragraph 75, indeed, under issue 6, that there is an inequality here. Women are flogged more often than men. And your answer, and you didn't touch upon it this morning, didn't make clear whether you will increase flogging of men in order to make it all equal, or whether you will consider abolishing the flogging altogether, which obviously is preferable. And I think there was a question whether these punishments are meted out by Sharia courts. I understand this is Sharia law, but would there be special courts that do it, or would the ordinary courts hand down sanctions of this nature? That is my final request for clarification. And again, I was very grateful for the answers given by you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tillin. Ms. Waterfall, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will thank the delegation for their replies. especially on my issue on death penalty. But I don't have a follow-up question. It's more a remark, because the discussion on the death penalty, I think, starts when crimes increases in your country. But as you know, studies have shown that death penalties doesn't increase crimes. So from this place, I still want to urge you to enact legislation to abolish the death penalty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Butterfly. Sir Nigel, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And I too actually, well, first of all, I want to thank the delegation for the answers to my questions in relation to Article 25, and I don't have follow-up questions on that. Obviously, we're all on tenterhooks to see what the Commission of Inquiry, the CONI, comes up with. I suppose, if it's at all possible, I'd remind the delegation that I asked what kind of preparation is the government undertaking to prepare the society for whatever outcome there may be of the CONI, and if there's any possibility for a response to that question, I'd be grateful. I also want to, like Ms. Waterfall, follow up on the death penalty dimension. First of all, I'm not quite clear about the nature of the moratorium. Of course, I'm very pleased that Bahrain, excuse me, I'm very pleased that the Maldives are indeed engaged in following a moratorium consistent with General Assembly resolutions on the topic. That's a very positive development. I'd be grateful for some information on exactly how it works. Are people sentenced to death still? And if they're sentenced to death, what happens? Are their sentences commuted, or do they remain under sentence of death? What will happen if the moratorium were to end, for example? Would they still be, would those who have been sentenced to death still be subject to the death penalty? So I'd be grateful for some clarification there. Like Ms. Waterfall, even though it's a private member's bill, this bill that would introduce mandatory death penalty, which is just, we're clear about that, that would be incompatible with the covenant, a mandatory death penalty. We've been clear about that for a long time, and so is just about every other regional human rights court or treaty body. There's nothing special. Our position is certainly not anomalous in that respect. But I understand it's a private member's bill. I don't quite, the language both of the written response and indeed of the delegation seems to accept, and here I share precisely Ms. Waterfall's concern, that somehow the increasing crime rate would justify the resort to the death penalty, indeed a mandatory death penalty, when one UN study after another, after another, after another has concluded that there is no conclusive information suggesting that the death penalty is an effective deterrent to crime any more than other punishments. The point is that people have to be assured of getting caught and then being tried and convicted and sentenced. It's not the death penalty per se that is convincingly argued to be a deterrent. And so I would be interested in knowing to what extent the government is seeking to discourage the passage of this particular private member's bill through the legislature. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, Sir Nigel. I now give the floor to Mr. Sassenbaev. You have the floor, sir. Mr. Sassenbaev.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would also like to welcome the delegation of the Maldives, as my colleagues have done, and thank them for the replies that they have given today to the various questions put by our colleagues. And yet, I believe that the question relating to the reservation to Article 18 of the Covenant is one that is of a concern to me. And I have a question as to the reservation to Article 18 of the Covenant. Now, the unwillingness of the government to remove that reservation is due to which reason? Is it because the society is fully Muslim and therefore there is no need to say that there are other religions in existence? That is an argument I may understand. But at the same time, the reluctance to withdraw this reservation could be due to the fact that if you withdraw this reservation, then your islands in the Maldives may be the site of a major influx of foreigners, and it will be difficult to live together. That could be a possible explanation. However, another explanation might be that people coming to the islands from other societies might represent a more attractive model of life and thereby influence those who are in the Maldives to change their worldview, and this would change society. So these are a few of the hypotheses which I have, but there may be other reasons, and perhaps you could shed some light on this. The next issue is related to the fact that you say that there is no discussion in society, that it is simply a postulate that Islam is the government religion, the state religion. You know, however, that in the Muslim world there are quite a few countries where the religion of Islam is separate from the state. Islam is practiced and welcomed, but at the same time the state exists separately from Islam and fulfills its obligations both domestically and in terms of its international obligations. So perhaps it might make sense to look at the experience of those Islamic states and make attempts to separate Islam from the state. That is to say, the Ummah would be responsible for the religion and the state would be responsible for implementing its international obligations under treaties and the Covenant, in particular Article 18, as well as other articles and other international human rights documents. Another comment. I would like to support my colleagues, in particular Ms. Waterval and Sir Nigel, when they said that the death penalty is not a means to prevent crime, and this has been amply shown. It is not a main feature in preventing crime, and so I think that if you say that there is a wave of crime, there may be some to see how the economic, political, societal, organizational underlying root causes of this crime wave might be removed. And then you will have other means of settling the issue of the crime wave rather than judiciary means. Then there's one more point. You, the head of the delegation, stated that a statute of limitations should not exist with respect to some claims. Now, this position does have some advantages. if there are human rights violations, then claims should be investigated regardless of any statute of limitations. But I do have the feeling, and I may be wrong, that there is a statute of limitations in reference to compensations. That is to say, people have been waiting for several years for compensation to be granted to them. So I would state that statute of limitations should indeed apply to claims, but they should not apply to compensations that people have been waiting for. That is to say that compensations should be granted quickly. And if that is not being done by the relevant officials, then those officials should be punished. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sassenbayev. I now give the floor to Mr. Ben Achu. You have the floor, sir.
شكرا. أود قبل أن أتوغل في
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. With regard to the right to faith, I would like to ask a question related to a fact. We have all understood from the Constitution that the Constitution stipulates that Islam is the religion of the state of the Maldives. It says Islam, no adjective, no definition, whether it is a Sunni Islam. In all your interventions and in the report that was submitted by the Maldives to the committee, you mention the religion as the Sunni Islam. So my question here is the following. My question is whether the Sunni Islamic, the Islamic Maldives belongs to a certain jurisdiction. Is it the Hanafi? It's the Hanbali? Is it another sect of the Islam? This question has to do with the first piece of information. The second question is, what is the situation? What is the situation of the other doctrines? For example, other than the Sunni doctrine, do they exist? What about the Shia? Does it exist? Thank you.
I now give the floor to Mr. Salvioli.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the delegation for their responses that they've given us this morning. I should say that my questions were answered partially. Some were, and others weren't. So if I may, I will make several comments regarding the questions that I asked. I think that the dialogue does make it clear that the delegation recognises that progress needs to be made in terms of gender equality, and I take note of the valuable information provided to us regarding the measures that the state is taking. Many of these measures will come into force in the future, and they are being implemented currently, but we will, of course, be closely following developments. Also, the fact that the state plans to eradicate domestic violence, that it's carried out awareness-raising campaigns. And for time reasons now, I won't ask you to go into the awareness-raising campaigns in detail, but I would be very grateful if you could give us specific examples in writing following the end of our discussions. Not the end of the session, I say, not the end of our discussions with the state, but we can give you a few days to provide that information to us. But as I say, there have been some questions that haven't been answered. I asked questions regarding domestic provisions and whether these domestic provisions are considered to be compatible with the covenant. For example, the fact that in some courts the equates to that of half of the man's. Now, how does the state view that as being compatible with the covenant? I also asked questions on criminalization of homosexuality. Those questions were not answered either here. The state party mentions the application of norms of conformity with Sharia law in accordance with the national constitution, but we don't apply the national constitution when it comes to any state. There is an international standard which is applied to all states, and the states know that they cannot invoke the dispositions of their provisions of their domestic law to comply with an international standard. So what I wanted to hear was this practice in light of the covenant, not in light of the national constitution or Sharia. Finally, I am pleased to hear that the state is making efforts to eradicate discrimination regarding inheritance, and that in practice, according to what has been said this morning, this discrimination no longer exists. If this is indeed the case, then surely the bill can be adopted so that discrimination no longer exists either in practice or indeed in the normative documents. Now, I do thank the delegation very much, and I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now call upon Mr. Rivas Posada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask a very brief question regarding the constitutional norm which establishes the obligation of being Muslim, according to the Constitution, which we've discussed at length here. My question is as follows. According to Article 9 of the Convention, no citizen, or rather no person who is in the Maldives can acquire the nationality of the country unless they are Muslim. That is according to Article 9 of your Constitution. You have given partial explanations to justify this. But of course I'm referring here to the migratory population, people who come to the Maldives and who would hope to become nationals of that country. But my concern relates to those who already have a Maldivian nationality and for whatever reason, and maybe an exceptional reason, but what happens to a Maldivian citizen who is a national of that country, but who then converts to another religion? In accordance with this provision, they should lose their nationality if things happen consistently. But I'd be interested to know what other sanctions there are, what other punishment might this person incur, this person who post data then leaves the Muslim religion when they're already a Maldivian citizen or national. Is there any case law on this? Is there anything to prevent them being punished if they change their religion subsequent to being a national of your country? I think this is an important aspect to be borne in mind. This is a problem that's been mentioned a lot this morning, and it does raise the committee's justified concerns in terms of compatibility with the covenant. We have heard some, I would say, imaginative explanations on justifying the practice of this norm, but the committee is left with the feeling that there is clear incompatibility between the constitutional situation regarding freedom of religion and the provisions of the covenant. I would be grateful if you could provide further information on this for us. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rivas Posada. I now give the floor to the Honorable Head of Delegation, Minister Ahmed, for responses to these follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the very fruitful discussion and comments which has been made by the committee members. Let me first start with the comments made with regard to the incidents of torture and the possibility of those being investigated. I think the honourable member has made a very compelling and useful comment on this particular point, and the observation is an interestingly a good one for us. I would hope that decides to establish such a commission, it would not only be limiting the incidents of such torture between the period that is mentioned in particular report. As I have emphasized earlier, much heinous crimes has been committed prior to 1977, as I explained, in the southernmost two atolls uprising, and in one incident, entire island was forcibly removed, and they still have been continuously advocating for their rights and possible compensation for what had happened to them. And in addition to that, such a commission should also include the 1988 mercenary attack by Tamil Tigers with the help of certain Maldivians on the Maldives population, which has seen 19 lives being lost. So I hope I take the member of the Commission. I think it's a very useful observation and suggestion, and I will take that suggestion to the government of the Maldives for its deliberation. With regard to the question of the budgetary issue of the Police Integrity Commission, the current practice is that the entire budget of the Maldives Police Service, along with the Home Ministry and the Police Integrity Commission, goes together to the Parliament. And as any other piece of legislation, this particular piece of legislation may need further improvement to address any deficiencies that prevails in that particular context. And I duly take the observation made by a distinguished member of the committee, and we'll try to address those concerns as well. With regard to the number of people being sent for prosecution by the Integrity Commission, I again take the observation made by the honourable member of the committee, and I would, for one person, we'll see what are the possible explanation for the lack of the cases that is being sent for prosecution, and what possible expertise or assistance that is required for this particular commission, although I can only make a recommendation, and I hope that this will in future may address certain difficulties or deficiencies that exist with the functioning of this particular Commission. Coming back to the question of the victims relating to the actions by police and defense force, I must say that the mandate of the Police Integrity Commission is only to look for the functionality and the way that the function being discharged by the Maldives police force alone and not the Maldives defense force. And for any such incidents, I would assume that other mechanisms that exist within the judicial and legal system of the country will come into operation. Hence, it will go for Maldives police force to investigate, as has happened. And again, the Maldives Human Rights Commission should also fall within that regime. And the Maldives legal and judicial system as overall will be the overseen mechanism for any action that is being carried out by Maldives Defense Force. Other than that, to my understanding, there doesn't exist any particular form of mechanism to address the any shortfall by the Defense Force. To the question relating to anti-terrorism bill, I apologize for not answering in the early session. Of course, this was raised yesterday as well. Honourable member of the committee has raised the question very validly. It is the penal code itself is a more bulkier piece of legislation, but which is now in somewhat moving. But I must say that it is not a speedy process. It has taken, I think, almost 9 years now in the Parliament, and only the current debate in the country might somewhere have forced members to again to act quickly on this matter, and hence the committee that is revising this particular bill has said that they have now taken action and speed up their work, and they expect the work to be completed within 2 months. But in relation to anti-terrorism bill, much lesser, much a smaller piece of legislation, presumably in comparison to criminal procedure penal code, has taken about 4 years, and I would assume that probably this is due to a technical assistance that may have required in the drafting stage of the bill. I would gracefully take the distinguished members' observation that I will try to push for the passage of this bill as soon as possible. I guarantee for that. This is, again, important in relation to our commitment to international governance and as well as domestic and international needs. For the coming back to the question of certain forms of sentences being awarded or being given by separate courts, here I would like to give an explanation of the Maldives judicial and legal system. Maldives judicial and legal system does not have a separate form of court system where you witness in some other Muslim countries such as Malaysia, for example. They do have alongside what they call a civil court system or civil legal system alongside with Sharia court system. Maldives has one legal system, and it is a fused system where the courts have the jurisdiction to hear both civil and Sharia matters as a practice, and there's no separation in line with Sharia offences and civil offences. For example, the civil court would always have the jurisdiction on all matters relating to civil offences, but those who comes from common law jurisdiction would understand when you say Muslim civil law would only meant that of a family and inheritance matter, but it's not the case. All commercial, contractual, torts, and all other matters are equally heard by civil courts. Same goes with the criminal court. It will hear all codified, uncodified, and Sharia matters in the same court. Family court, there is a separate family court in the Maldives for the purpose of speedy judicial process only, and this particular court only hears matters relating to matrimony, divorce, marriages, and of course alumni and all other matters relating to children's welfare. So I hope that answers that question. I will now pass to Ms. DR.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the additional questions you have raised and also further clarifications on questions you raised yesterday that we were perhaps not able to attend to. With regards to the reporting and treaty reporting, I think I will request my ambassador to comment further on that. We do welcome the we should try and adjust in order to have treaty-specific reporting, and definitely, despite our limitations in terms of capacity and resources, we take that into consideration and we'll be looking into that further. On the issue of the Human Rights Commission and membership being limited to Muslims, that is how the legislation stands at present. That does not obviously preclude the fact that we may be able to bring in changes into that legislation in order to ensure that non-Muslims can also sit in the commission. But actually the issue has not arisen as such in our community because, as explained earlier, it is a homogeneous community whereby all Maldivians have been historically Muslims. We do take into fact the consideration there's a lot of especially migrant workers coming into the country who are working there, who are non-Muslims in modern-day Maldives, but they're not settled as communities as such. They're sort of mobile communities in terms of the fact that they come in, work there for a specified period of time and leave. The other non-Muslims come into the country specifically tourism-related, and they're, again, not part of the community of Maldives as such. They're very separate on resort islands, come on holiday and leave. So I think these issues are not issues that we have had to grapple with as such at present, but I'm sure these are issues we would need to be grappling with in future, and we do take into consideration the concerns that you have raised in terms of looking into how to address these. Again, on the issue of torture, I think the Minister has also touched on it, the head of delegation. As you say, it may be well worth to establish a commission to look into issues of torture and to ensure that these are addressed, though they may have occurred historically. We take your point into consideration. I just want to highlight, though, that given the political situation in the country, it has been extremely difficult to establish any independent commissions looking into any issues at present, because everything is extremely politicized, and it always has become a matter of which political side you're on or who you are trying to sort of go after in terms of alleged crimes that may have been committed in the past. But I think it's an issue that the country does need to deal with and come to terms with. Our own viewpoint on the delegation is we should try our best to address what's happened in the past, but I think we do need to look ahead, because as a country, I think we have been trying to point fingers and looking back into the past and being unable to move ahead in terms of going on with our lives. But definitely very much take into consideration the points that you have put across. I think the Minister mentioned about the anti-terrorism bill and also the anti-torture bill, the penal code, which seems to be stuck in our parliament. And again, this is largely due to the politics of the situation. Following the 2008 change, when President Nasheed came into power in parliament, while he had at some points not clear majority in parliament, but he did later on have very clear majority in parliament. Had there been the will in the government at that point in time to push through legislation that we required to strengthen our democracy and to ensure moving ahead, especially in the area of human rights, I'm sure we could have seen a lot of progress being made, but unfortunately we did not. And as many of you are aware, President Nasheed came in with the aspirations of a lot of Maldivians that he would bring in rapid changes in terms of consolidating our democracy, but unfortunately the situation did not work out that way, and subsequently the events that led to the transfer of power as well. This government, we're definitely committed and dedicated to pushing through these legislations, and as part of the delegation I would like to commit to saying that we would definitely lobby and work for that when we return back home. Just to give you that, it's not an easy process. There's a number of parties in this government. It's a coalition government. While we have tentative numbers, it's not not such a clear and easy task within Parliament as well, but it's definitely something we will be working for and look forward to going ahead on that. I think on the domestic violence legislation, I don't have all the detailed information that was requested. I was personally myself very much involved in putting this act together, consulting with the different parties and consulting with NGOs and all the relevant stakeholders on the anti-domestic violence legislation. Definitely it's a criminal offence. While there are fines, there are also prison sentences in there in terms of how to sort of address the issue of adequate punishment for perpetrators. I would request my embassy here to provide further information on that, because I think it would not be fair for me to go into details which I do not have at present. On the issue of corporal Children's Rights Act here with me, it's Article 10 of the law which was enacted in 1991, if I'm right. The wording is quite vague in that it says that there should not be any punishment given to children which could cause them psychological or bodily harm which is not apt for their age group. So again, this is not a very recent law, and perhaps at that time we were not dealing with these issues of corporal punishment. Again, I'm not aware of the details of the Education Act, but that's something we would look into, and it's an issue, the regulation. It's something that we will consider, and we will look into strengthening the legislation in this area when we go back home. As we mentioned before, it's not widespread. Instances do occur, but if there are additional steps that we can take to address it, that's definitely something that we would want to go ahead with. I think on the death penalty issue, perhaps the head of delegation would wish to add further as well. The sentence is there. It is actually, the system was one of pardoning prior to that, and we called this an unofficial moratorium because it's not officially there in any legislation as such. So the death penalty exists in the Maldives. There was an unofficial moratorium which continues to stand at present. The legislation, as I understand it, is to remove the power of pardoning and to sort of ensure that the sentence is carried out. That's something that we are definitely concerned about and we would wish to look into. And as the committee members have raised many times, studies have shown that the death penalty itself does not deter crime. And in our country, there is an issue of crime linked very much with drugs amongst young people, and we believe we need to really, we have been analysing and studying the situation. Obviously, we have not been able to take adequate steps to address young people going into drugs and into crime, and thereby preventing this escalating crime in our country. But we take your point that this is what we do need to look into. I'm not able to commit as such on the death penalty issue because it's a highly sensitive issue, and obviously the national stakeholders would have very much a say on it. But on our part, we are concerned that this discussion is back, and we do understand the sensitivities and the fact that this does not solve the problems that we are facing at present. In terms of the reservation to Article 18, which I understand is extremely sensitive, as I mentioned earlier, it is the wish of our society and people. And why I say this is because the 2008 Constitution was drafted by a special Majlis, which was put into place. How many members is it? How many members that within special Majlis? 50. Yeah. The special Majlis is constituted just for redrafting the Constitution, and it is a large assembly, representatives of the people, and they chose to put in this clause in terms of the fact that Islam is the official religion of the state, and also linking citizenship to being Muslim, which I think, as I explained to you, has become very much part of Maldivian identity and something that Maldivians wish to retain. And that is why this has come in, and this is why we have to put in the reservation into the article. We understand issues there in terms of perhaps people being denied their citizenship, but this matter has actually not arisen as such in the country, because while we say that there's no, people do not go around checking who is practicing Muslim, who is doing what. I mean, people are free to practice their religion as such. So the question of having to give up citizenship for a Maldivian who has renounced his religion or no longer practices Islam has not arisen as such. But the other way around, whereby Maldivians coming, non-Maldivians from outside coming into the society and settling down or living or marrying, getting citizenship is an issue for non-Muslims, and that's something I believe that we do need to consider for the future. So I will leave my comments on that for now. I think finally, the Honourable Member asked about the kind of Islam. Traditionally, Maldivians have been Sunni Muslims belonging to the Shafi sect, so we've had only one sect as such in the Maldives, and that's why we say it was a very homogeneous society. We didn't have the other sects being practiced or Shia Islam being practiced in the Maldives. So this has been the way it has. And as you mentioned before, many of our documents, while the Constitution says that the official religion is Islam and does not say a particular sect as such, there are other laws and documents in the past that specified Sunni Muslim earlier on. I do not have the additional information on that, but I think the head of delegation may wish to add to that. Finally, definitely we will come back on providing information on the domestic violence and also gender equality and empowerment of women in terms of awareness-raising campaigns and the work that the government has been doing, and also additional plans it has for the future as well. On the issue of homosexuality, obviously, as a Muslim country, it is not something that is allowed, and that I think the question was raised yesterday. We did not get back on that. I think the figures do not show huge numbers of people being prosecuted or tried for this crime or punished, but definitely as a Muslim country, that's not something that's allowed in the country. I think I've covered most of some of the issues that were raised by the honourable members of the committee. If there's any additional clarifications, definitely our delegation would be happy to get back to you, and I'll pass the floor to the head of delegation.
Well, thank you very much. With the permission of the chair, again coming back to the first question that we had in this morning, with regard to the provision of the international covenant practically being implemented domestically, I'd like to give an explanation here that the Constitution provides and be enforced in the Maldives through a piece of legislation passed by the Parliament. That is one of the venue that is provided. That's what we have been saying all along. Other than that, interestingly, as the member has asked whether the judiciary has taken any notice, whether there is an instance when these rights has been invoked before a court of law. I'm glad here to explain that few of the instances that has taken place in the Maldives has seen that quite often international covenants been invoked. For example, in 2010, the then President Nasheed arrested Honorable Yamin, Member of Parliament, and Mr. Qasim, as well Member of Parliament. In their arrest, I was representing them at that time as a lawyer at Supreme Court, and we had the opportunity to invoke the international covenant on the very covenant that we are talking now, ICCPR. And I'm glad to notice that the Supreme Court in its judgment has referred to this particular convention and has said that the arrest and detention were arbitrary, and the Maldives courts are subjected to these conventions. And as well, it has explained to the right of a habeas corpus, and has given its explanation in particular judgment. And then in much later, in 2011 again, when President Nasheed again arrested several politicians, including myself, again the Criminal Court of the Maldives referred the same judgment and asked the relevant authorities to release the detainees. In this perspective, I attention of the members of the committee to Article 68 of the Maldives Constitution, which very interestingly has given explanation that a court or tribunal shall promote the values that underlie an open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality and freedom, and shall consider international treaties to which the Maldives is a party. So here you have very interesting provisions in the Constitution. On one hand, when you have Article 4 and Article 16 and Article 10 of the Constitution, which subjects all laws to Sharia law. It also gives a wide range of options and opportunities to invoke other open democratic and international treaties. So the answer is yes. There are instances where the court has assumed, I would say in some instances very vigorously, the rights that is embodied in while defending the rights of the citizen in the Maldives. But here is probably a try by a Muslim nation, an instance where they've been trying to best harmonize both Islamic law and modern democratic values that is found on international treaties as well as other democratic societies. But in doing so, it is also mindful of to what extent it can also retain the features of the Muslim law. And the question that is raised here is understandable, but equally, the Constitution very clearly says Islam is the main source of all laws in the Maldives, and therefore the offences that is being raised here or that is being prescribed in the Maldives embodies both common law as well as Sharia offences. And homosexuality is one of the offences that is prescribed under Sharia. And the penalty that is available for certain offences includes flogging, and that's the reason why it is being retained in the Maldives judicial system. Again, I would like to stress here that there is no discrimination in terms of implementation of these punishments between male and female, be it flogging and other punishments. The concern was raised by the submission that on the number of cases that have been investigated, we found more female being subjected to this form of punishment than male, and probably this is one area which we will have to conduct further investigation and studies. And as it has been highlighted, the Maldives is faith, traditionally the Shafi'i sect of the Muslim faith, and in some instances, though the Article 4 and 2 doesn't specifically provides it has to be a Sunni Muslim, but in other provisions of the Constitution, instances are provided where it has categorically said that also, interestingly. For example, Article 72 of the Constitution is stating the criteria of members of the Majlis. It states, for example, it has to be a Sunni Muslim.
Assemble without any prior authorization from the state. Now, my question is the following. Does this also encompass demonstration and marches? And if that is the case, then could you explain how it is that demonstrations are dispersed? We have received such information, and indeed the delegation itself has said that a recent demonstration, or at least part of the demonstrators in a recent demonstrations were not permitted to join but had to stay outside a fence. Could you explain how this is reconciled? On Article 23, paragraph 23, the Article 7 of the Constitution says that each individual has the right to freedom of opinion and freedom of expression, to the extent that this does not undermine the basic tenets of Islam. My question is, does this mean that in this case, the underlying tenet of Islam is a restriction against the freedom of thought and the freedom of expression? And if that is the case, then could you please provide some more explanations on these limitations posed by the tenets of Islam? Next question. Article 30 of the Constitution states that there is a freedom to establish political parties. It says each individual has the right to found and participate in political parties. Now, I've looked through practically all the documents, the official documents, unofficial documents, as well as other material, and I haven't quite grasped fully the situation relating to political parties, their presence or their absence, whether there's a single party or several parties. I haven't quite understood that. So could you please provide some explanation? And if there are parties in the country, or even if there aren't, how does the legislation of the Maldives establish what criteria need to be observed in order to establish a party, who is entitled to establish a political party, and what principles should guide that establishment? Thank you.
Mr. Sassenberg, I've got 3 more people who want to take the floor, and I will urge you to take no longer than 2 minutes each so that we can break at 1 o'clock. I now give the floor to Mr. Fatala.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'll be very brief. My question is related to issue number 20, and here I will refer specifically to Article 9D of the Constitution of the Maldives, which provides that non-Muslim cannot become citizens of the Maldives. My question here is a very practical question. Let's assume that a Maldivian man is getting married with a woman, not Maldivian woman, French or whatever, Egyptian, who is not Muslim, and then how she can get married and not be a citizen of the Maldives, and how will be the family situation? But this is in contravention with the civil with the covenant, and I believe also with the main principle of Islam, which considers that the family is the essence of the society. It is the base of the society. And therefore, taking into consideration these 2 elements, how can you solve this issue and this problem that someone is getting married to a foreigner, non-Muslim? How do you address this issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fatala. And now I give the floor to Mr. Bouzid.
شكرا سيد الرئيسة. سوف أكون مختصرا. سؤالي سيادة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some questions relating to the judgments handed down by courts. When a verdict is final, that is to say, when it relates to the executive body or the legislative body, then these verdicts seem not to be applied. What is the situation currently? Does the government intend to take any measures so the judgments handed down are applicable to all without exception? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bouzid. And lastly, Sir Nigel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Also extremely brief. I thought I heard the head of the delegation say earlier that Islam is the main source for legislation, and I'd be interested to know what part of the Constitution that is said. I can see in Article 10, paragraph A, that it says, and this is in a translation prepared at the request of the Ministry of Legal Reform, Information and Arts, that Islam shall be one of the basis of all the laws of the Maldives. One of the basis. There's a lot of difference between those two things. Is this a bad translation, or would the head of the delegation want to revisit the language he used? But I do think it's extremely important for us to know which is the reality. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I look forward to the response of the delegation.
I thank members of the committee for your interventions. We are almost in time for the break, and so I think that the distinguished delegation should be ready after 2 hours to come back with your responses. So we'll be back here at 3 o'clock. And I'm sorry that we have to eat into your lunch hour, but I'm sure that is something that you welcome.
Yes, thank you.
A longer break than 10 minutes. Good. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
ෆෝන් හබර් ස්පොන්සර් කුරි වතනීය බ්ලැක්බෙරි රාජ්‍යයේ ප්‍රථම පහර වතනීය
ವತನೀಯಗೆ ಪ್ರಿಪೇಡ್ ರೇಟ್ ವರ ಪೊಡತಂ ಅಗಹೋವೆಚ್ಚ මිහාර පික්කට් තොග්ග අඩ්ඩිහ නුවලාරි ඔප් පික්කට් තොග්ග මිනිටක 40 නුවලාරි ෆෝන් වාදක කොම්මෙ සිකුන්තක වෙස් මිහාර හරුදු කුඩ කුරෙන් ඩබ්ලිව් ප්‍රිපේඩ් ඔප් පැකේජ් එකක් අවහ බදව කරවා
अस्सलाम वालेकुम मिगडी गे हूनो हबर गहमा देमे फेनिगे मेदि अलिफ्ताल गे इंसानी हक्गुतक बेहे कमिटिया दिवे राज हाजिर कुरुमगे देवना बद्दगुम मेदु कुरिया दानी दे सेशन नक फुर्तम सेशन निमिगें एदि मेंदुरु एके जेहि सुरे फेशिगें हातरे जहन्ने कुरिया मेदि कुडको वागुतु मादुई कम वेस फाह कुरेवे कमिटी गे बेफुलुं इतुरु सुवाल्त वेस कुरम बेनो फितिबिनमेस एजेंडा एक गोतंग हमा वागुतु नेतुमा एके हातरे जहर मिनिमाल राज्य गाडिंग हातरे जहर मिनिमाल देवने मेदु गे देवने सेशन फेशिगें दानी हाय जहर कुरिया दाने नुए जहान देंदे मेदुमि कुरिया दिए सेशन न कुडको बलालायरो ईयगे सेशन निमुनु इरुगा कमिटी अशार मेंबर गे कमिटी यूएन गे कमिटी वनी राज्य गे डेलीगेशन न सुवाल कुरेफा मे कुरी बैग फोने फवा इश्यूज का ईजग मिकोलों हुन हबरग सम कोमेस्वर का बलालिन खोंग मालुआ का तोवाह के देखेवेगन दानी द फुतम कमकव मेदुगे वेस कमिटी फा कुरेव कमकी राज्य फोनुआ फवा मे मंदुबुन्नकी हम मंदुबु गे रिपोर्ट मे फुरी हम नों कमंग इश्यूज रंगला एड्रेस नु कुरे फुरी कमादे गी तुरु ईजगे सुवाल फाहु जवाब देने फुरिसते नुदिबुम मेदु तंकोले प्रिपेयर वेगन हिं जवाब दे डे फमेने हिवनी अगड कंसिस्टेंट कों हम एव वाह के दक्कम गैगंड कमिदिए दे कोमेस्वर का वाह के तेरे कोऑर्डिनेशन डिमांड वा कम वेस फाग वेगन दिए देफार देच के वेस देने विता अगड फेनिगन दिया हम गामिस डॉक्टर जामील मे हुशली सुवालें ए मे राज्य के मिहा हिस्ट्री ओए है सिस्टमैटिक टॉर्चर ए सिस्टमैटिक टॉर्चर राज्य के मीडिया अन्य के सरकार पर कुरीगवे सम ओइतो सवाल कुरमु डॉक्टर जामील एब्बस्वे देनेवी systematic torture kurives keves rajega hurikamang ebefulunna ve sama fahagu akama namaves Jameel gawakful ama nimmal tayir kolennoe dunya ekamang defend koffa dennevi rajega ekahal history no nanekama systematic torture no nanekama angafwani the komekas mige iturum ve sama wahaka take dakka fawani war baver issues take address ko femena hasako rajyega miharum parliament ko veste kamunda mara maru hifumuge bill fast kurumuge wahaka vese death penalty ge wahaka am committee war kambodu me wahaka dakkamun gende names sarkarum gosti be fulun hama ekolge mandubun angani me adi waki goten hama nu jehekama names miharuge crime rate ituru wuma eki kommes waraka sarkaruge wahaka ngeni consider death penalty namawes committee invest pahakure gotuga me death penalty eki hama UN ge eki research tan hadagen invest hakurar ko eki ahartaku ga hada for research takum invest fenigen dani death penalty eki nota maruhi fumaki hama invest gotaka society egga mujtamau egga me kutta maduegen dane goten nunkama enu ituru gottave samahore ituru punishment tanota miharwes tan fis kure hukum takum invest hama wa gotekama wani miwani den ituru malumat hodalan hama mewagu talgun men me badal kolan Dr. Shahida kinetto dekida wani meduge me badal wun kuriya de gotamed
medu wara bodu kaamiyabiye edigen ediyei de rajyeka insani hagotaka mate kora sarataka me medenni ham mihar jagara guarantee evi me mifar me committee ke badal muge natija kunneruga eve from kama gwa davane nawastaka diasakun bihat avana aha de meduga rajyeka Ingafawa la insan amulta tahqiq kurmataka mustaqil commission ekodawagama ade be from ushalum Jameel wani ijaba devwa Jameel wani dasti manna endra sabada niwaha gendo anta korabana me ehna me se dunia ya Jameel me to kiya tafa musatunu Jameel dawani rajyega ham mi majiga wara bod jari mahinga fa geye dunia ftandala jeha hinga pe nuwe rajye kwe mi aniya kurum mi ingulunga sa kamen nune putta midal ehnonto me faham dalwi ekan kuraka nuwane bazaka nuwane sabaki wara siyasi mi mahadu wara poda siyasi ho jese mahadu ke e wara poda maske prokureviye maumunge amalta nubada go se deto ehna me se committee ke nimun or yin kora go se akureviya sabbi samjudai nimmani bihat ahaka hame rajyega huri na insani amalta bedena nizame ka bedumataka haas nizame ka ko mehme dennevi rajyega mihar huri shari kortaka mata shanu padluga ehinga dia dari mata beduma khas nizame ekodawaduma gwadebi me faha kurevene mi mushalum me committee ka mushalum bi kedin kya befle ena ki mi committee odatna kuriga yugoslavia ka hinga dia la insan dari mata beduma kotu ke padiyara kenne befle mikama wara poda gabu kurani pranalagwa mi saida eparad ma pressure rajya mi amazugin dani em wara poda kuriru mengai then anagutum bala nama sarkar wara masake prokurevi wara graswat ka jawab devveto dehenamaves au litum bikama tayyar wada tum ga buguri kumnas kahaga nai unikanta au litum ebra aproda hon gosta mi medenevi mi committee ki ko anekkam eha poda kanekkane sa wada sai ehnama ebra poda tayyar wada kanage mi wada nawani then mi ICCPR ge e muahada ge puri bahasa besianu eha poda goda wahane ehnama mihar mi masake puri mi gendiyei debeka bahada ge pratami swadu mi korevoni paralunge afasha gutgabe muahada ge purta bara matra ya behegutum me mihar yannani e sahoge matra behegutum niga saha korevene warapoda swadu koravati me abdul muhammada behegutum kiveto alamba evolutta JSC nala oti ad abdul muhammad kya remvare gaje kama meduga swadu kori akamvetoti baha koravapa ben rajyega shari nizam guri matra tabati paha koravapa warapoda miga mi farduge haggutaka himaya kurwan gottaka amatuni dani agundanawani mi wara nagala hingamunda kamike then agunitum rajyega hingamunga verekam baik watta dafa verekama nugwan sawarangule kadika nikala petten annane ಅವನು ಗದು ಕರಾಗುತ್ತಗ ಮಿ ಬಗಾವೆ ನುಗಯಾನಮಕ್ಕೆ ಮಿ ಕಮಿಟಿ ನಿಹಾಕ ಬದ್ದ ಕುರಿ ಅವನಿತ್ತು ಮಿ ಕಮಿಟಿ ನಿಹಾಕ ಬದ್ದ ಮಿ ಕುರಿ ರಾಜ್ಯ ಬಗಾವತಿ ಗೆನೆತ್ಕಿನ್ ಫರ್ದುನ್ನ ಬಡ ಅನ್ಯಾತಿಗೆ ದಿಗොන් තාතිವೆ ರೇಗ ಮಾದೆ ಹಿಂಗಾತಿ ಜರಿಮಾತಗೆ ಮೌಲುಮಾತ್ ನಿಹಾರವನಿ ಇಬೆ ಫೋನ್ ಹಿಸ್ತಾ ಕುರೈಫಾ ನಾವು ಗದು ಕರಾಗುತ್ತಗ ಮೆಂದುರು ಪಹಂ ಬದ್ದ ಕುರಾರುಗ ඒ පරපොඩ දෙකකින් දාන්නේ මේ මුසාහරා කරා අපරාධක අනියා කරා වාහකයා නූසරණ අනියා කරා වාහකයා පරදුන්ගේ අත්පත් හකුතක සරකාර හදාගන්නම ගන්න මෙම්බර් මේ උසහකලම් බේනු මේ රාජ්‍ය මඩන වස්තු අද මතකෙ මිකරවණි රයිස් නෂීදුගේ අබුරුකල නරාගන රයිස් මෞමන තනාතියේත අවුනෙතුම් ඒ මීකි නෝන්කන්නේගේ එකම් කරම් වී මෑදානක් එකම් කරම් වී මෑදානක් DRP යා PGM ගේ රජිත කන්නේගේ මේ UN ගේ වරම් මති සෙම්වරගේ मजली है मैं यूएन गद्दें ओन्नाने अजब्दाल निजाम तेरे गोन्ना शरीय मजली का मजली है ए मितना बड़ा है क्या सियासी को तुम बाको देखिए मां हम अगुवट नहीं बे पुरुंगे और हिसाब कुरंग राज्य फरात मडाना बे पुरुंग एफत कंकन साफ वडा यहाँ पर नेती
डॉक्टर शाहिद में कोमेश्वर का डॉक्टर जामील वाणी वाहक फुल तेरेंग बुनला वाणी එවස් කහලා වෞද රයිතුන වෙෆර් නුවාන කමං early elections මේ දියුමුගේ නම වෙස් අල්ගුන් මෙන ෆෙනිගෙන් ගොස් අල්ගුන් මෙන මීඩියන්ස් ෆෙනිගෙන් ගොස් වනේ डॉक्टर वाहिद में मिहार के राइस वाहिद वणी हम मिखमा वाउद वेफा अर्ली इलेक्शन से हम थान देन कमा बुने फमी वणी किने तो मिहार मेवी जामील गोस मिकहाला में डॉक्टर जामील गोस यूएन के ह्यूमन राइट्स कमिटी कुरिमती ग मिकहाला वाह के हम में एहा बड़ दोगें हम कमिटी के मेंबर कुरिमती के देम किने तो मिखमा बेगुतुन देखेने
هذا هذا تربط فارا أرا إنه ده إنسان هذا تو واحد أشياء غوارا مهم كمان هي تدبهم واحد ده إنه الدنيا جيبلس قام كيه إنسان هذا تو كليا كمان كليا ما يفهم قام إنه أما كمان ميتبني كان كده بيان كرا قام تو كان تمر ولا قام تو إيه ما أنا بتجا الدنيا بجاعنا ني أميدا أموري إجماع تا متا الدنيا كان بجاعنا فاهم واقع تو كي تدبهم واحد تكابه كم غفرات كم දැන් ආගුණම යකින් ඒ ස්වාගත කරවි කමිටි මෙම්බර් එකට ගන්නවානේ මේ ඉන්දියාගේ හාර්ජි සෙක්‍රටරි පොරෙන් සෙක්‍රටරි වඩාන් කර මස්රා කරුගා වර රංගල වර සාප්කෝ සරකාරු මණි වවුදු එපා අවස් ඉන්තිහාවේ බේවෙම අද රත්තම ගෙන්දේවි ඔක්තෝබර් මාසයේ ඉන්තිහා පාවා වාහක එම මේ මිහාර ඒ පගාවතු සරකාරු අවස් ඉන්තිහාවේ බේවෙම නිම්මා පාවාකන් අද යුදාංක පාවාකන් දිවා ගක්ක පාවාකන් මේ රංගල එම්ම නෙගි පාවා වාක්‍ය ते मिहार है नूने विदालों में किए एक अबूकरण का मैंने ऐसा सिर्फ 18 बेफुरन की वरंग इल्मी तजुर्बा कार बेफुरन की दुनिया के सत्य का मोदी है गाँव में के इंसान हक का संतप दिरासत करो मंगंदवा और तजुर्बा कार बेफुरन मुहिम दो प्रोफेसर मुहिम संध्या का तजुर्बा की बेफुरन ये बलवारा तजुर्बा कार हेरुन तेरे बेफुरन को नहीं बेफुरन सुखा मतीगा एस्पार नी कुरिम एस्पारो कारे विदाल का एस्पार नी आसारो कार विदाल नहीं बात है कि ඒ කොරමල තමයි අරගල මේ පදිහේ වෙගෙන් දාන කම හැමෙන්නේ එද්දක විදාලවේ තියොම්ෙන් මේ කෝණි නිම්මි ගතක ඉන්තිහා පාපාන විදාල කන්සා විදාලවනි එහෙනම ඉන්තිහා පේවෙන් හොරියා පියාපි පාට සකෙන් එපත් පියාය දැන් අගොන්න ඊවනේ පොඩක් දෙන්න දක්ක වහකන්නේ මොන මේ ප්‍රොග්‍රෑම් රෝදේ බට්ටා දක්ක වහක් දුන්නා ඉන්නත දුනියගේ එල්වෙස් කොමෙක්ගේ හොරියා පියාපි පාටියෙන් එප්පහනුවාන ඉන්තිහා මොස් කරා අපදු වෙස් වෙරකම ඔන්න පාටි බේනුවාන ඉන්තිහා මොබාව මත ලප්පුරා එන හොරියා පාටතන් එබ්බස් වෙච්චියායේ ඉන්තිහා මොස් කරානි එබුණා පහගේ මාන වර සාප්පෙවනේ ගොඩගන්නවානි විදාලවනි කමන්නාම එප්පහෙන් වාන එහෙනම් එහෙම එබේෆුන කෑට අඩ නාස්වාන් දැන් කොම්මෙකස් මේ කෝණිගේ නතිජා පදවාන් එන රවුන්ගබු කරා ගොතුගා වරක් බඩ එබේෆුනුගේ මාසකේ ප්‍රමාදයෙන් දානේ කෝණිගේ නිම්මුමුගා මේ බගාවතකම නිම්මා පියම් අවස් ඉන්තිහා බේවමකි වරක් බඩ පාරලොබ්බා කමේ ගොතුගා නිම්මෙවා එන බගුඩ හිතුම් මේ අවස් ඉන්තිහාබගේ මාස්සලයා අද මෙහෙmme ජදුගාන තෙනුමුතු අනිනාලි පරාත්තක එකමගේ ඉන්සාෆ හග්ග තිබුණු මස්සලා ඒ මිෆාර්ගේ පතලොම නිමගෙන් දාන වර මුහිම්මු නිම්මුන් ඒ එකමගේ ඉන්සාර වුණ මේ තිබෙන අස්තෝගේ
ಅದೇ ಸೆಫಾರ್ ಅವಳು ಆಲಿಯಳು ಅಲಂ ಬೇಣು ವೆಮಿ ವರ ಕಮಿಟಿಗೆ ಹಮ ಗಿನ ಮೆಂಬರು ವಣಿ ಫಾಹ ಕುರವಾಫ ಮೆ ಎಬೇಫುಳುನ್ ಅಲ್ಗೊಂಡ ಹಾ ಫೆಮಿಲಿಯನ್ನು ಮಿ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಜರ್ ಕಿನೆ ತೋ ಇನ್ನನಿ ಕೆ ಹಾ ದುವೆ ಕುರಿಂತೋ ಮಿ ಬೇಫುಳುನ್ ಅಡ್ರೆಸ್ ಕುರೆನ್ ಜೇನೆ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸ್ ಅಗೆ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್ ಫೋನು ಆಫಿನ ನಮಗೆ ಹಮ ಅಲ್ಗೊಂಡ ಅತುಗೆ ಸೊಬೆ ಮಿ ಮಾಲೂಮಾತ್ ಮಿ ಹಮ ಎಬೇಫುಳುನ್ ಗತವೆಸ್ ದಾಣೆ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್ ಕಣ್ಣೆಂಗೆ ಮಿ ವಾಕಿ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸ್ ತಕೆಂಗೆ ಬುಹುರಿ ಹಮ ಸೀದಾ ad algun denna me waki issues take not waki sual take ebuhutte me muddate kuring me jalsa ge kuring not me badum ge kuring me rajya ge delegation nan hawal kofa names me badum ge teren fenige media hama komme committee member en hemves me hushe oluman note hushala la fe report February that me furi hame nune hame kani me it's just a matter of academics kannenge just answer the questions evaru veenama rangalu vise me denne fennani kihina to me procedure hage gatuga me nani me sarkara libifa innane to me prepare vevene jaga adege turun iyege session nimuma fahu sualta nimma fa jawab tayyar kuram ves hama fursat libifa waru meduge me badumge fenige me diye hama wara bawaru hame consistent ko ekachike kiyo me diye ma budu jawab takennu dibi em kinato me dekeni me government prepare nuwuni to no prepare wen wagutu nudibuni to me kinabba me kada me kuriyadani
ta agunda suwa saafana sauna even nidawa hakeki me committee mate kora gota badati nama fursa moti durada report ang mushahala singe befun suwa take media har ponu vima e suwa take hadu te jab demba demwada nawa gota kanunge e kane swagdet ade me committee mate ke kora gota ki midheni hatara haru en haru e committee me muahada tanfis puri gota ge report ang mushahala de rajen topa gota ki rajye baiswa uriha insan hagota ke muahada ete magandu uriha daare ekode common ko report akere माने की फर्दुंगे असासी इतिहास का तो मुआहदा या फर्दुंगे इक्तो हक मुआहदा इन मुरिहा मुआहदा में शामिल हुआ होता आम रिपोर्ट मुशाला ने कोम्मे मुआहदा एग्गे संफिज कुरुमगे मुराजा दिमा वीमा नता तविगा दिमा हिसाब ए मुआहदा का दे इतुरु एचन मुशाला ने इनमें से वेप मदावनी राज्य में मुशाली इतुरु दिमगे वारा मौजू मादे दें महाकुरबनी मीडिया हर वनी यूएन कमिटी निम्मा पे दिव्य राज्य के हालत वतन कुरा रुगा तिमन्नम में बेण में मिहर एहर सवाल तक जवाब तक दिबे सरत इवा नसीम वी किने तो एनगे मार्ग मत बाफन क्या मिमर कत्तो उनिया मी कोडको दिन जागा मी हद्दु जेहेतो नोता डेथ पेनल्टी तंफी मिका सवाल से कुरमत कुरेवी ए सवाल तक जवाब दिनमा एनहार दोस दिबोनु एनमे मी सरकार बदलमा गुडगें कुरी गुर मसकत उत्ता जवाब एदे मसे कुरेवी इबे फन मी सवाल तो जवाब की फुर्सत के कुरी के वेरियन तो नसीब सरकार का बदनाम को लियोन तक फोन बा देन मिकोला मी यूएन ना फोन भी दियो पदा फियाम वारा दिरफेंबर के दिनो वानी फोन बा वारा तेरा अंजरा इंग्रेज मगे तेरा निहा जरा अदी वानी दियो एड्रेस नको एगे तेरे के कन का दक्का pri वाह के सोनी हिमना या दसवर दियो मियोती या एबे फ्लो में निहार सवाल करब वनी तो तफसील देववा पे अदी उसम बस ये मेरे को बस सवाल का जवाब न मियदु एमा अउन हेतुम මිකමද්දෙන් ගබුල් කරබෑන එනත රාජ්‍ය කුඩගමෙක්ග මිකන් තති විධානක එහෙ නමවෙස් මේබර රංගලා ජාව දෙවුනිස් මේබර රංගලා සංකම් ආම කරබුනිස් එහෙනම් කරබුනි හි මිකමකි පුරිහා දෙහරගිතුන් හද්දත ඒක හිමනේ කමෙක්ම බල්ලවාප පුරිහා ඉතින් බලාස ඉඛලාස් කරකමාක තෙදරකමාක වකාත් කරවාප පුරි උනිකන්තක අමෙදේ ඉතලා වඩා ගෙන්නවා එහෙනම් එහෙනනු මස්කෙමි කරබන්නේ කි එහෙමෙන් අදේශ පෙන්නනි බයික්කා වාසක ජවාබ මුදෙව්වේතන अनेक वार्ता दिलेफुन दिवस जब देव गेंदवाता
Dr. Syed nimal mo nga fa kolam benu waki kameng beto
ಅದು ಮಿದಾದ ಪಾನಂತ
ನಿಮ್ಮಲ mo fa kolam benu eves kameng bento माफ करे से खुड़ खुड़ टेक्निकल मसले के है आडू नगोस के मेवलेनी थंकुले दुर्गुरी म गुलालिम कम वेसवेदान मिहार मासे के क्रोम गेंदनी हामा अमुरा गुलालवे तो मियदुगे मे राज्य अलिफ दाल गे इंसानी हक्कु तक बे कमिटी यंग हाजिर कुरे फमी राज्य जवाबदार कुरुमट का हाजिर को मेवन अलगुनी वन मिहार डॉक्टर शहीदान केस गुली फमेती डॉक्टर शहीद आगुन मिदन बुनदी मे निम्माल मंग एवे से चैत्र कोलम बेन तोय
धन्यवाद बेनुवनी द्विराज्य के इंसान हगत होगे वाहक मिहा मती पेंवरगे मजली है मिहा सीरियस पेंवरगे वजन करम दारुगा ऐकं कुरुमत का राज्य फोनुबेने एम्मे पुरिहमा वफ्ते नूने नी ඒ ගානගතුන් බලාන මෙතන වඩාතුන් එමේ කශේකම් වනි human rights minister රයිගතුන්ගේ ජීවම් පාසාන අංගවාගෙන් මතාර රික්ලා හොන්නේ බේෆලේ එකම නාගේ සිම්මාය මෙතන වඩාන් එකම ජවාබ්දාරය වඩාගතුමකි එහෙ නූන්නම ඒ අව වඩාන්නවන් ජෙහෙ ඉන්සාන් හනුතකගේ හෆීර් ambassador for human rights බෙබොන්නේ එබෙම මුසාරනවා තිබ්බන වඩාන්නවන් ජෙහෙ ජනත් සබකි ඒක බද්ද වඩාන බේෆෝන් නකි මේකම වර එකසික නොවාද බේෆෝන් සබකි දුනියා මවමුන් වා දක්කාරුගා අබ නිසාග දෙකේ මවමුන් වෙරිකමගේ කුරි අනියාතරගේ වාහක ඒ මවමුන්ගේ වෙරිකමගේ අනිවාර්ය බුන් මිනිසුන්න හග්ග හොද දේශේ කියා වාහක දක්කා දෙක ජවාබ්ගා දුනියා එතන ජවාබ්දාර වඩාගතුම කීයේ ඒකී දිවෙහි දවතුම් රයිතුන අකුල ගමකම රයිතුන කුල වරබොඩ අනියායෙන් ඒ රයිතුන එෆරස් බන්දු කුරුමත්තක එකම වකාතු වෙන පොනුලිකන්නේ ජනකමකි डॉक्टर जमील कीवेस मिहिंगा जहंतक वरबोड हरकत करिए इदने सरकार वट्टाद वरबोड एक्टिविस्ट अदिनी मी मिहा वसंतरे मोहदाग वरबोडंग आदे दीनी गोतो नफरत सेद्दुमग वाहक एक मनातुमग वाहक डॉक्टर जमील की महकन्यास दीनी गोतो नफरत सेद्दुमग वर पुन्ना बुस्तोल देफले मी कमी पार्टी नेरोन कंसर्ट गे आगुम हितुम ए कंपाइलर एमा वर कम एकसिगे नुवे डॉक्टर जमीला दुनिया वडाගෙන් මේ ජවාබ්දාර දෙවමු ඒ සබකි මීහම වකි සියාසි කුලේගේ වකි බෙග හද්දතක මේ ආරාගන තිබ්බයි වයි ගතක ගම් බත්තන් කරො මේව පදේෆුක වඩන්න තිබ්බයි ඒ මිකමකි නිහරුන් හිතුම් කමිටි මෙම්බරන ඔලගෙන් වාණ කමෙන්නු නිතාවති දාවර එන්ජිఓ පරාත එසාත බොඩම වගෙන්දේ දුනියා මවමුණකි අම ගයුමකේ डॉक्टर जमीलकी अधिराज्यක මේ දිනි නෆරත බෙදෙමුගේ වරබොඩු පුන්නා හරකත් කරියේ ima dem dakwa waakyaage kola badaluwe e committee nimma nemma badalugen daane awun hitun e natija ke vegen daani committee faratu nimma nemma tam harkashi kotegga a ama kurin series loge masakkatta harakat aniyata beduma sarkar lazim kuro
මියදුගෙස් දෙවන සෙෂන් අලිෆ්තාල්ගේ ඉන්සානි හග්ගුතක බෙහෙ කොමිටිගේ දෙවන ಬದಲ್ವು ಮೇದು ಕುರಿಯ ದೇರುಗ ಈಯಗ ಬದಲ್ಗುಮ್ಗ ಕುರವನು ಸುವಾಲ್ ತಕ ಮ್ಯಾಗಂಡು ಗೊತ್ತಗ ಜವಾಬ್ ದಿನು ಮಿಯದು ಕುರಿಯ ದಿಯೆ ನಮವೆಸ್ ಫುರಿಹಮೆ ಜವಾಬ್ ದೇಫ ನೆತುಮುಂ ಇತುರ ಮಾಲೂಮಾತ್ ಒಳುಫಿಲುಮಟ್ಟಕ ಹಮ ಕ್ಯಾಂಡಿಡೇಟು ವಣಿ ಮಿ ಅಶಾರ ಮೆಂಬರುಂಗೆ ಕಮಿಟಿ ವಣಿ ಹಮ ಸುವಾಲ್ ಕುರೇಫ ಸರ್ಕಾರುಗೆ ಬೇಫುಳುನ ಇತುರು ಮಾಲೂಮಾತ್ ಹೋದು ಮಟ್ಟಕ ಹಮ ಕೊಮ್ಮೆಸ್ ವರಕ ಇಂಗ್ರೇಸಿ ಬರಣ ವೇಗ್ ಗೊತ್ತಕ ಮಿ ಜವಾಬ್ ದೇಫ ಮಿ ವಣಿ ದೆನ್ ಹಮ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಶಹೀದ್ ದೆನ್ನವಿ ಹೆಂಗ್ ಹಮ ಏಕೆ ಕಂಕಮ ವಾಹಕ ದೇಕೆ ಫಣ ಎಬೇಫುಳು ಮಸೆಕ್ಕೆ ಕುರಿ ಕೊಮ್ಮೆಸ್ ವರಕ ಜವಾಬ್ ದೇವೆ ತೋ ನಮೆಸ್ ಬೈ ಕಾಲ ಕಂತತ್ತ ಮಿಸಾಲಕ ದೀನಾ ಬೆಹೆ ಬೈ ಮೌಲು ತವ್ವೆಸ ಪ್ರಿಪೇರ್ಡ್ ವೆ ಫೂರಿ ಹೆಂಗ್ ಅಳ್ಗೊಂಡೆ ಹೀವಣಿ ಏಕಮ ಜವಾಬ್ ದಾರಿ ವೆವೆ हम गෑමස් වර බෑවර සුවල්තකේ හද්දු ජෙහුමා ගුළුවෑගෙන් අදි මර මරු හිෆමුගේ බිල් ගානුන් ෆාස් කුරාති එකම ගුළුවෑගෙන් වෙස් සුවල්ත කුරේෆවි දැන් එබෙෆලක හම කොමස් වරක නසෙහ තෙරිවස් වි මේ එහෙන් ඉස්ලාමික් ගාමුතක එහෙන් ස්ටේට් මේ රිලිජන් වකි කොල්ලා ෆෝරම් වෙස්නේ හම එකනේ කන්සිඩර් කර මේ හම එකනේ නසෙහක te ගොතුග මි බේෆුලුන් මේ කොමිටිගේ බේෆුලුන් සර්කාර මිකන්තත හුෂාලානි දැන් සර්කාරගේ කමෙන් ඒකන්තතක ඒකේ කුරිය දෙවමන්දේ human rights ගානෝනගේ දශුන් මේ දිවෙහි රාජ්‍යවස් මේ කුරිය දනිමානයේකි පෙරිස් එග්‍රීමන්ට් ගේ දශුන් දිවෙහි රාජ්‍යයේ human rights ගේ කන්දත බලහට්ටෝ මෙදනි එහෙම වයරු මේ එග්‍රීමන්ට් ගේ දශුන් කුරා හුවේ නොත වා වවුදුතකෙන් ඔන්නානේ ඒ එමිහුන් ලිය මිහුන් විස්නා බිනාකො ෆෝන්න දියුමෙන් ඔන්නානේ කිහිනෙත්තෝ ඉන්සානි හග්ගුතක බෙහෙ කන්තත කුරිය ගෙන්දානේ මේ කන්තතක එග්ගොව්වා ගොතුගේ මතින් දිවෙහි රාජ්‍යස් මේ බස්වමුගා මේ එබස්වමා එක්කොන් වානම දිවෙහි රාජ්‍ය සම මේ ගානොන්තක එග්ගොත මසිකේ කුරෙන් ජෙහෙනේ මියදුගේ මේ සෙෂන් ගේ ෆෙනිගෙන් දී කොම්මස් වරක ඒ කන්වෙන්ෂන් ගේ නොත මේ වේෆුලුන්ගේ ගානොන්තක එක්කොන් හාමනයිස් නුවාතිවේ ඒකන්ත කිහිනෙත්තෝ දිවෙහි ගානොන් කිහිනෙත්තෝ කුරිය ගෙන්දානි මේ වේෆුලුන්ගේ ගානොන්තක human rights ඉන්සානි හග්ගුතක ගානොන්තක එක්ගොතක කුරිය ගෙන්දවෙන ගොතක ස්වාලස් කුරේෆ වනි දැන් අනිකස් පහකොල්ලම් බේනු වනි ටෝචර් මිදිය දුවස්කොළුගේ ඉන්සානුන්න කොෆුරි අනියානුවත ජලුතක්කය අද එනුම් වෙස් තන්තනුගා කොෆ රයිස් නශීද්ගේ වෙරකම්ගේ කුරිම් වෙස් සම කොෆුරි අනියාතක්ගේ වාහක තකුරාරක කොමිටි බේෆුලුන් දී දිවේ සර්කාරගේ බේෆුලුන ස්වාල් කුරමුන් අන්නම වෙස් කොම්මස් වරගේ ඔළුම වෙස් ආරාගෙන් දී හෙන් අලුගණන් හීවනි එෆරතු ડોક્ટર ජමීල් දෙන්නේවි හම කඩේලිගෙන් රාජ්‍යයේ ඉංගෙන් එබ හුට්ටේ ඉන්සානුන්ගේ හග්ගුත නගල ඉන්සාන අනියා කොෆුරි කන් මේ දිවේ තාරිහ බලාලි කමුගා වියස් නම වෙස් සම ડોક્ટર ජමීල්ගේ වාහක ෆුලු නිම්මාලි ගොත දෙම් වාහක hak deki dunya mamun dekke veruga me denneve evves gotakan hama rajyege mikha kamen non nane kaman me algon menen hama gamues kandelige mi dogekkan media ina adi rajyege tariha balali kamuga viesingen fennan hunnane den algon benum bunada me shahid denneve me comments waraka me badalumge tere mihar fenige midani rais nashiduge aburu fulan arawadaga nawatan ege badalga maumunge comments waraka difa kurum wese bure mi hagigatuge mi kiha waregge algoda hiwani kiha waregge badalumekkan ebufane nengeni kannenge algoda kanen kivegen kamen gama gamu wes mikaha tantaga kaakuto moli kaakuto gade mikahala bahusen nun kurane amugotoge insani haggutan himay kurami waki mi haggutan himay kurmenno mi insani haggutan himay kur committee memberunge jawabutaka balaliero esenot suwal committee memberunge suwataka balaliersi inge ebe fuluna ves me hama wara rangala rajye kantan hingamun dagen inge kamves forwan anen forwal men eche miha mifata technology ge zaman nuga technology kuriera forna zamanega echen oluwalan avvaran undoguwana de komes warkan online ko ves algodo balalafi mikama behe kinetto divehi gina rayitu mikama begotan dekenide gina bayako hama mikam follow kura kamal gonda faagve wara mufaves ve mikah kanta hagige wara muhim huri hamene singe mi wagut algonda mi gulale fa mihiri kurige foreign minister Ahmad Nasim dok Nasim kina mi meduge badalum diegotun
yerke badalum ko hama dogu hadam ehera dari gete duniya ya kodwe jabida deviyo hama dogu hadam hama adek kitka kosen hama dogu hadam ehera dari awe aroha miye kulere ko sibi gite ko stara hederi dogu ko snege duniya ide kiyani miharo dimanna me dirisa me dusya ariya no na awuda mi ariya dibulu miyo ebre adawar gotuka veriya kuri miye dirajje ko tariu ko dusuru ko snege tibawona evi ekam ko uri kini erege waga takkaru erege tari ekamka du habit ere papka boy da afrika bani bi go da afrika ere pore erege tator dege ihe no ene ere ere pare erege papure uri aniya ver kawan da pak dirajje verika kuri mi uterege ka da pa verika kuri awudu nega awudu tiberika peri ekam kuri mi gwa ke da tel dege da tibe dogu di ko di rai te to kabu prani eri de gure diu kabu no prani gure bodi kabi awur kari ere gadiya gwa ti te gire te par da kabe kuri te tertere e bodi kabi de kari gire ere bodi kabi no pare wa ena so duniya ji de hame baat ki takkar e kala ti aratari dirajje adi wadi ka ke dekho badiye ki ya derakam to ki bagaay ko ke sarkar badu ko ke nigal de kurairu ama ekutto bis bayad venne ke dogu tan hado dirai to kabu par ko te ka to ni bihar arika e ariya ver ka yadi itu be ni bavi wahidu ge ariya ver ko wa de arika awude cheni e ituru harfatu harfataka macce tane awude ge ni ariya arika te miyokko dosto terege ya baade ge taraf dunna ko balu kutta ta ke ni bihuriya security news ba harfati ge niyo baha duwe ebiyo ge taraf bihuriya ta kura awun bihuriya bang ta ya wall street journal yadi ebiyo ya our president wall street journal ko ulage padman me to sapra warka awun
Nasim algun mena warak madu me wagutu adu annama me dani tamkole bara wahak da kalfananta ade kurige foreign minister Ahmad Nasim algon mem wahak maseke kollani hama miyaduge mi badaluma behe gutum Nasima ki hama uriya be pune singula dan an gotuga maumunge verikamge dawruga hama itaken aniya lifa be fule algode anika Nasima gule femeti ade kurige endawa Nasima ade far algon aham benu vani mi comments waraka kurige mi dibi fahuri aniya taka ade miharu ade vengeto kurige endawa vinunto
ni lege tule ko te kita baare ve di mere subede kanne lege emege satte ki
rangalo nama ade algon ade kollam benu westwale ben comments warkan hama me kurige sarkaru ganota mamunge tiri saharuge digu sarkaruga me vefa libi fori aniya taka මේ කොමිස්වරක මේ කොම්පෙන්සේෂන් දේනතෝ කොමිටින් ස්වාල්කොෆ වනි කොම්පෙන්සේෂන් දේනතෝ දෙකංකන් තහුගේ කුරවෙනතෝ සරුකාගේ ෆරාතුන් තහුගේ කුරවෙනතෝ එස් වනි ස්වාල් කුරේ ෆදෙක් සරුකාරුන් ෆරාතුන් දිය බේෆුලම් වනි දන්නවා ෆමිකොලන් මාලේ අවම ෆහනත රාජ්‍ය අවම ෆහ මිකංකම මෙදු විස්නානමේ නසීම හීවතෝ මි ෆයා ගොතෙක් ගන්නුවත මි බවදල් ලිබෙන් ජෙ ෆරාත්තක බදල් ලිබිගෙන් දානකම නොත එබේෆුලුන්ගේ මස්සලත තහුගේ කුරවෙන හැම වෙසීවතෝ
අවගොඩක ये दुए भी सरकार के क्या कर दिया भी सरकार के लगा किया ये चीज़ तो दिखा होती तो है देख मेरे में माहौल का दिया इसको के वहाँ का या बेगो तो हम काटे के दुनिया माहौल है इसको हटा ने एक दुए किया के बाद को एक तरीके का मेरे के पापा का भी तो मैं अनिया वाली भी क्या अनिया पूरी को वहाँ लगते कि आउट भी ऐसा के खास के रही सकती अनिया जी भी थी ये भी रहा हिसाब के में कहता है बाहर तक कहता है दो के को के बाद तारीख का भीतर के कोई बैग और मालूमात खाली हेरिटेज सरकार परिये बहु केदरी भी बैठक पर मुस्तवाई करेगा ठीक है तो उसका इस भीतर हाथ दिया देख अरे कभी नहीं नहीं कह रहे खड़े के मामूल के सरकार के मामूल का बिहार वेलकम के बुरी ने मतलब ये भाभी भाई तो नमक का बुरी मामूल तो का बुरी बाहर होती ये भी बीवी होने पे कबूले नुकरा ने अरे मारे अरे कभी हिसाब से लिबी दुनिया कंपनसेशन लिबी क्या कर बाहर का होगा ये देख बड़ी फली है मामले के सरकार इस तरफ बोले नहीं है एक कमेंट दो
निम्मल मोहम्मद दन्वाला ने विशेषंग बेतो
अरे आवगोड बारे कंप्यूटर से उन्हें भीतर होगा मारे का बिहार में माँ बड़ा अनिया करो साइड की सरकारों डिफेंस नहीं होना फुलूना देवाबियों में के माँ बड़े दिए रही अनिया करो दादी एक बार बारे कंप्यूटर क्या होने होना नहीं ते विवाह के बारे बड़ा भीतर के देखे बिहार अरे आम भीतर के बीच में विवाह के धक्का ये भी होना है तो बाहर देखो ये भी दूसरों के बीच में बाहर धक्का दे बियादु अवगढ़ पाई दूसरी बुरी भी होना अवगढ़ बाहर धक्का बहुत बहुत जीत होना है ये अवगढ़ ही बनी दिव्य राज्य के बिहार में ही होता कांतता बैठ लगवा भी वो तो बारह गोस को दिव्य राज्य देते कह रहे हैं अरे कटोरी से टूटना जैसे लेकर अवगढ़ में खोते हैं बॉयकॉट का गुआ कर मुझे अवगढ़ है बॉयकॉट वहाँ नहीं है यही सब ध्यान भी कर सकते हैं हेलो
ad marko da chadu algon men adi es sual akolo
ये तो बारह मार्को तो कर जाओगे
algon denne miharo me fuluhunge note me sarukaruge amalta me hunna gotun me befulu zimmadar kureveni kihinetto
super है तो वीडियो के बाद ना बोल तो super zimmadar super है इकट्ठे इकट्ठे super है ने मतलब कोई कुछ तो बात ये वीडियो ने super है दिखाई उसको बेरो ने मतलब कोई कुछ तो बात ये बिकॉज़ दिखाई इस तरह बात तुरंत अभी आउट में दिखवा देते हैं कि इंसान हक तक बेरो तो बकाया तो नहीं होता है देखो ये देखो ने इतना भी इंसान हक तक बे ने जब ये बिकॉज़ तो बड़ा बयान ये भी वो एक तो कबूले टुकड़े ये दुनिया में देखवा के जब ये देखवा के अरे का अरे ये देखा बात है जैसे खाने का वो रहेगा ये अरे सीधी हूँ मसले की वीडियो नहीं तो हिस्सा बताइए हिस्सा में कैसे कैसे तो वीडियो अभी जब यूँ हिस्सा बताए होता है तो ये अनिवार्य को तेरे लश्कर जीरा जुड़े के जो रही तो जज्बे के बिनो बदल रुपया
शुक्रिया नसीम
ad hamma dadi demme kalgon men me nasima wahak furda kaleruga me kuriya dia komes warka panel discussion nevves Geneva ge me baddalumuga terega ijege ve sam faha kolli hen hame ekani sarukaru media delegation ge advice not naseheten nun not befulunge jawab teken ekanyen nun me committee ballawani me harwes rajye ge hama ye Dr Shahid wes den vidawle gotuga amnat najiba de farhanaz faisal weswani mitaga hama NGOs ge gotu rajye represent kura NGOs gotuga harakat riwamun ehmema sarukaruge miharuge sarukaruge wahaka hurigoin ekanyen nun mi befurna aduwigen dani hama gamuwes torture victims association ge faratum wes ham komes warege malumat eked libigen dani algun me hewani ebefulun wes takuraru ko dannomandiya ebefulunge committee ge nimmunta nimmani kiye waki bayaku buna ettaka balafa kannu mi bahustan wata mi baddavunta nimmalma fahuga adi mi committee ge member mashwara kurma fahuga den rajye ge halata etchi set ge bala nimma fahu gote
निम्मा रिपोर्ट दियानी अदि राज्य के हिसाबुं वे से हम राज्य के सरकार के कमे मी बेफुल दिया रिपोर्ट आई गोता कंकुरु नोट नुकुरु गैवस राज्य के मिहार कंग ऐस वर मुहिम बलाल मिहार वर मुहिम मसल तके मी बदल मुगे तेरे गवानी मी कथा तका में दुवाह के देखे कॉमेस वर का राज्य के मी गानोनु गा हम एकनी मी मुस्लिम का वांजे हम एकनी मिहिं एकनी देफे इनीमा एति एहा साफनु आकम वेस कमिटी के बाय मेंबर बुने फवे एक एक मजहबं इस्लामुन एक एक मजहबं उले वाहकया एका कांत तकिनत्तो दिवे सरकार निम्मं बेनु वणि नुत वाकि गोतक निम्मन्या एगोत स्पेसिफिक को मे कानून गलिये फोन जेहेन कमा मे कमिटी में अंगनी मिहिं नुआती मिगोत कानून नोन्ना तीवे बाय फहरुगा दिवे रायितुन एबा कानून दिबेंजे हिमायक नुदी बिमिदानी मिका कंत वातिया एकुगा UN Human Rights Commission ने वेस एक लवाला फमेननी आदि पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के दशुं अलगोन में वेस मी मासे के कुरोम में गेंदनी दें कॉमेस वर्कंग हम अलगोन में इतुर मालूमात गेनेस्ते मुंदान नमेस दें मी बदल मुगे देवन सेशन फेशिगे मिदानी इरोसी हाय जहर कुरिय दाने नुए जहांदे मीमा एवगुत कोल गने काय अलगोन में इतुर मालूमात है कि बदल कोल दान एवत गुतुगा लाइव कोंग ए मंजर तवे तिबे फना हमें राजी टीवी में दुरको गेना मी वक्त टीवी वेलविति वार बड़ा शुक्रिया